And then something happened there or shortly after that made you start focusing on conspiracy theorists. What was that?
Trump had recently announced his candidacy, and people on board the cruise were really excited about Trump, even people who were kind of left-leaning. And all this just new hope and energy had been awakened among all these different populations. I had been covering the anti-vaccine movement for a while, and there was a bunch of anti-vax stuff on the cruise, including Andrew Wakefield was there, who's of course like the father of the modern anti-vax movement. He was so excited. What I later realized were sovereign citizen types were really enlivened by the idea of Trump being president. People like Laura Eisenhower, who's more in the esoteric realm. I was just thinking, what are these people going to do when he loses? Where are they going to go? Where are they going to put this energy? I was like, I should really keep following what happens when these folks get pushed further to the margins. And then, of course, that is completely not what happened. For me, I think covering conspiracy movements was a way to understand the country a little bit better and understand these elements and forces that were clearly much more powerful than I had thought, and that as a journalist, I clearly didn't understand. So I set myself to understanding them.
One thing that I love that you pointed out is there's a very common trope that people will say that conspiracy theories are a CIA operative, but you point out that Karl Popper had referenced it 10 times in his book, so it goes back at least to the 40s. This idea had been around. You also cite Glenn Greenwald, who talks about the fact that there are conspiracy theories, and that's obvious. They do exist. But we're in a place now where it's such a common and probably overused term. Do you think that we need a new language for it? How do you distinguish what an actual conspiracy theory is versus very real world misinformation and disinformation techniques?
Right. Part of the issue, too, is that the term conspiracy theory has become so politicized that people automatically have a really negative reaction to it. The point that I tried to make in the book, and that we run into again and again, is that it can be incredibly hard at first viewing of a story or a social event or a political event to understand what the forces are behind it, to understand whether this is a conspiracy theory, an actual conspiracy, whether there is misinformation at work, whether there is disinformation at work, which is more active and more directed. And so it's hard to tell. History is chaotic in the making. I try really hard not to automatically dismiss anything or slot it into a box right away. I try to withhold judgment as much as I can. Though at the same time, some of the worlds that I write about, I hear the same ideas being repeated over and over again in slightly different forms. And so it is somewhat easier for me to say, this is a conspiracy theory that is being repackaged.
And you actually write about the evolution of fluoride, for example,
right.
How every decade it was bad for you, but in a different way that kind of matched the times. And I feel like my personal one that I've been tracking for a long time is the anti-vaxxers. Do these ideas, do they have to change with the times in order to keep being valid for people or to keep indoctrinating other people into them?
Yeah, I mean, conspiracy theories are endlessly adaptable, and we've seen that primarily with QAnon. I think that's been incredibly instructive for people to understand how it's continued to change forms to bring in new people. The anti-vax movement is another great example of that. There have been a bunch of different waves of anti-vaccine thinking, literally since the 17th century when vaccines were first created. And in every sort of generation and iteration and cultural context, the reasons why you're not supposed to trust vaccines are a little bit different to make sure that they are appealing to a new audience. It's really kind of incredible how creative we are with our thinking.